$1.5 million. It is a lot of money. When it comes to housing and in a major city like Toronto, what exactly does it get you? What part of the city could you live in? And what exactly are you getting? Are you getting a garage? Do you have parking? Do you have a backyard? Is it detached? Is it semi-detached? So we're going to go over all those kinds of things today, looking at some of the major areas of the city and breaking it down so that you can compare East versus West versus Midtown versus downtown. Okay, so let's start with East York. People refer to East York as generally the east side of Toronto proper. So it's probably everything from the Don Valley Parkway, which there's a highway kind of running right through this ravine valley system, all the way to essentially where Scarborough would start. Scarborough is kind of it used to be its own city. It's now amalgamated, but that's kind of generally referred to as a totally different kind of larger area of the city. East York is made up of a bunch of different neighborhoods. With all of the areas that we're covering today, it's going to be like large swaths, and you'll see in each area everything that I've mapped out. We're going to talk about how many transactions happen in that area, how many happen during a certain price, in a certain price range, and then what exactly are you getting. So here's East York. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so you can see the areas, and I won't bother going over where I kind of start and stop, but I did include the beaches just as an example. Didn't include necessarily upper beaches. I wanted to try and keep all the geographic areas somewhat close to each other in size so that we could get like a pretty good representation of, okay, how many sales happen in this area, how many sales within this price range, and etc. So when we look at this section of the east side of the city, we can see that there were 37 sales between $1.4 and $1.5 million. Now, the reason that I kind of kept it to that range is just because I think that if somebody is shopping and has a budget of around 1.5 million or up to a maximum of 1.5 million, they're probably not going to be all that interested, or, you know, the properties that are, let's say, around $1 million or maybe even 1.1 might not necessarily be relevant to them. And I will do other videos at other times at different price points, just to kind of give you an idea as to, you know, what you could get. So I focused on that $100,000 range. And so you can see that there are 37 sales that happened. What I did is I looked at just April and May. So far from a new listings and sales standpoint, those have been the two busiest months of the year. So they're a pretty good representation of 2025 so far, the types of properties that get sold and the prices. I'm filming this in early to mid-September, so we don't necessarily have great data from the fall market, which would kind of be like a secondary kind of bump in activity. So I wanted to go backwards a little bit and focus on the spring. Here's what I want to share with you. So if I go to statistics and counts, we can see that the average of those 37 sales is right here, $1.439773 million. So, you know, about 1.44 million. Property taxes on average, about $6,000 a year. And here is the number of bedrooms and bathrooms. So looking again on average, getting a 3-bed, 2-bath home. Now, attached, semi-detached, what exactly is that? So of the 37 sales over here on the right-hand side, so looking at these, you know, there's a bit of an even spread for a while as you kind of go down, but then you'll see that by far, South Riverdale has the greatest kind of percentage of those properties selling within that range. So if you are looking in the $1.4 to $1.5 million range, you have a higher probability of finding a home in that range in South Riverdale. Now, in terms of what kind of home, of the 37 sales, you can see that 22 of them are semi-detached. So that's by far and away the largest kind of proportion of those 37 sales. 9 of them were detached. Not many row houses or things that were like attached to each other all in a row, meaning more than 2. So a row house could be 3 or more. And then a couple of duplexes and, you know, some commercial stuff. And then as far as the style, by far and away, 26 of the 37, 2-story. Some 3-story homes, they would be newer. Some 2.5-story homes, which aren't necessarily newer. They're just homes that people have kind of gone maybe into the attic and created an additional space or something like that up there. But a traditional, you know, East York sale in this price range is going to be a 3-bed, 2-bath semi, period. Now, what do you get for that? What I want to do is play around with the filters a little bit and just say, okay, of those 37, how many had at least one parking space? So I unfortunately have to highlight all of them, but 25, so you can see in this top left corner here, 25 of the 37 homes did come with some kind of parking, which is great. And when I say some kind of parking on site. So, places that don't have parking, those other 12, you might be eligible for a street permit. So that's something that you'd have to, or have your agent explore through the city, whether there's availability or not. Now, what you'll find traditionally in the pockets of the city that are in Toronto proper, if you will, so whether it's East York or whether it's the West Side, which we'll do after, Midtown, that kind of stuff, not a ton of garages. It's not easy to find properties that have garages necessarily. They do come at a bit of a premium. And I would say even people who have them don't use them for parking their car in them. They'll use the driveway and then use the garage for storage. Storage for outdoor equipment and other things, right? Lawn furniture in the winter and et cetera, et cetera. But garages, not always easy to come across, especially at certain price points. Now, at higher price points, garages become a little bit more prevalent. So if I remove the price range and I just say, okay, starting at 0 and going to unlimited, in that same section for those same 2 months, you can see that there were 259 sales. So there is a lot of residential transactions that happen in this area. 37 out of 259 exist within that 1.4 to 1.5 range. What do the homes look like? Because you're going to have a difference between the finishes in a detached home in this price range and the finishes in a semi-detached home in this price range. And it also certainly depends on neighborhood as well. There's quite a bit of variance in a relatively large area like this in terms of the type of home and what they look like. So, if you look at this one here, this is a property that sold during that time frame and a bit of a Victorian look. It is a semi-detached property. And when we look on the inside, a little bit narrow, and I don't mean that as a criticism, just, most semis are relatively narrow. They would probably be like certainly under 25 feet in frontage for a lot and probably around 20 or so. And it's not uncommon to get more narrow than that. Hardwood floors look like they're in pretty good shape. Kitchen that has been renovated somewhat within the last, I would probably say 10-ish years. There's stone, there's nice tile. It's gray and whites, which have been popular up until I would say the last couple of years. So it just kind of gives you an idea as to like what the finishes look like. Then if we look at a detached home in that same price range and right around that same price point, you will see a little bit more original features. So parquet floors, some of the original wood trim and that kind of stuff, which some people really love. Kitchen, a little bit more dated. You can see that the cabinets kind of haven't been updated in a while. You've got white appliances, which aren't necessarily in style anymore. Countertop does look like it was maybe a stone, but maybe the countertop was changed, but nothing else was. So, you'll have a big difference in finishes from a detached home in this price point versus a semi for sure. Okay, so for our next part of the city, we're going to take a look at the west side of the city. And everybody's going to have their own kind of definitions of where the west starts and stops and all that kind of stuff. But again, I wanted to keep the geographic area fairly similar in size to East York and the other areas to give you an idea of like representation of sales and that kind of stuff. And this certainly covers what I would consider the vast majority of the west side to be. But what's interesting about the west side compared to the east side is that if you say I live in the west, it's just a direction, and then you probably would say your neighborhood. So whether it's Roncesvalles, High Park, Parkdale, Little Italy, whatever the case is. If you live on the east side in East York, I would venture to say that most people say, I live in East York, and it could be kind of anywhere. And some people would say, I live in Leslieville, or I live in, South Riverdale, or I live, Withrow Park, just as an example. So that's just an interesting tidbit I find between East and West, just as an example. But anyway, so exact same time of year, April and May, we have 27 sales. So right off the hop in that price range, 1.4 to 1.5, we have a fewer number of sales. And what I will say, and you may discover this on your own, I find that I worked very recently with a family from BC, and they noticed on their own before they even kind of got in touch with me that generally speaking, East York or the east side of the city is cheaper than the west side of the city. Your money goes a little farther in East York and you just get kind of more bang for your buck. So you're more likely to find parking, you're more likely to find kind of better finishes and that kind of stuff for that price range. West side is more expensive, and people who are watching this video and who are familiar with Toronto and live on the west side and prefer the west side, they often say west is best. I don't necessarily adhere to that, but people who are loyal to the west side, that's what they say. Now, I'll go through the same practice that I did in East York. So let's first of all show you the stats and counts. So of those 27, you can see that the average price was slightly higher. So 1.45 million. And the property taxes are also higher. That right there is a little bit of proof to what I just said about how West Side is a little bit more expensive than East Side. Property taxes are based on assessed value of homes, and they're not necessarily tied to what somebody paid for a property. They're just tied to what a certain organization assesses the value of homes at on a municipal level. East York, that average was around $6,000, and on the West Side here, you can see it's around $6,700. So there's a little bit of proof that what I said was true. That the West Side, generally speaking, it has higher valuations than East Side. You're still looking at a 3-bed, 2-bath home from like your kind of stereotypical property that sells in the 1.4 to 1.5 range. And then as far as what kind of place, again, you are definitely looking at a semi. So 17 of the 27 are semi-detached. You can see that only 4 would be detached. And notice that, in East York, this number for attached or row houses was 3, but it was 3 out of 37, and this is 5 out of 27. So a higher proportion of row houses on the West Side. Part of the reason is, and this isn't necessarily definitive, but a little bit of a general blanket rule, is that a lot of homes on the West Side are older. And I find that the row house type are typically properties that were built much earlier. So like very early 1900s, late 1800s, those kinds of things. You will find, generally speaking, more 2.5-story homes as well on the West Side. People go into the attic a little bit more. The homes were built a little bit taller. Again, that Victorian style you find more commonly on the West Side. So that's why there's a higher proportion of that extra half story. But the larger proportion of the 27 are just your traditional 2-story homes. What do they come with? So how many have parking versus don't have parking, and etc. So if I just tap in parking, so 20 of the 27 had parking of some way, shape, or form. That means that only 7 of the 27 did not. And then as far as garages are concerned, 13 of 27. Now, why would that be? Typically speaking, on the West Side, there are more laneways. Someone who is maybe a little bit more in tune or in touch with like the history of the city might be able to explain why. There are more laneways in the city, on the West Side of the city. And so with laneways, they typically happen at the back of the backyards. And so you would have the traditional structure would be street side, your house, your backyard, a garage, and then laneway at the back. And that's how you would access your garage. Those laneways exist in East York, but they're much, much more prevalent on the West Side. So you've got more garages. If that's important to you, West Side is maybe where you'd want to focus. Now, what kinds of homes are here? So again, we know that it's predominantly semis and then a few detached. So if we look at around 1.4, this is a Victorian, again, fairly narrow. You've got some charming features like stained glass and stuff like that. Again, that's because of the age of the home, for sure. It's going to be narrow. A lot of West Side homes have this kind of bump in, so they're not a straight rectangle across from front to back. If we get to the kitchen is typically a good indication of like what kind of shape the home is in. You can see, sorry, that last picture was probably better. You can see that, cabinets haven't been updated in a long time. Countertops haven't been updated in a long time. You're less likely to get great finishes in around the 1.4-ish mark. And for a semi, you'd have to get closer to the 1.5 to get better finishes. So here's a detached home in that range. My guess is that the finishes won't be like outstanding. It won't be like a recently renovated home. It certainly has been staged, so it is giving some nice appeal, and that absolutely would have helped the sale. But you can see when you get to the kitchen, this is probably a kitchen from early 2000s to early aughts kind of thing, like between 2000 and 2010 would kind of be my guess. The stove is from much prior to that. But cabinet wise, I would assume that that's the case. There are other aspects of the home that are going to be much older than that. And you can see, for example, like look at that door. So that door, and this is going to be really hard for you to tell from here, but that door hardware, so like the handle, that's probably original to the home. So it's probably like 100 years old, something like that. And the door obviously has been painted and stuff, but finishes will be at detached between 1.4 and 1.5. We'll probably need some upgrading in some various places, and not just aesthetically or cosmetically, but probably on a mechanics level as well. If I take away the pricing and just say, okay, well, how many transactions happened in here in total? You're looking at 200 sales. So there's certainly going to be more residential sales that happen in East York on the west side. Part of that reason is East York, I would say over the last kind of 10 years, has been more like first-time buyer destination. And so there's just a little bit more turnover there. West side, I would say, is a little bit more established. People are kind of staying in their homes longer. In general, they are a little bit bigger, but it's also a little bit of an older demographic on the west side. And so people are just kind of staying in their houses for longer. So we just have fewer transactions happening in general. There's also quite a bit more on the west side industrial and commercial space. And so that kind of takes up a little bit more real estate, and there's not as many houses kind of side by side as there is in East York. East York is a little bit more, don't get me wrong, it's not the suburbs, but it's a little more suburb-like in the sense that you have kind of more of a grid with similar houses kind of side by side by side by side. Okay, let's move to Midtown next. So Midtown is more expensive than both the West and the East. And so you'll notice that right off the hop, because if you're looking at the screen, you'll see that in April and May, there were only 7 sales between 1.4 and 1.5 million. And if we, just to kind of demonstrate the point, if we take off any kind of price constraints, there were 147 sales in total. So 7 out of 147 are going to fall within that price range. It means the vast majority of them are going to be north of 1.5. There were some that probably happened below 1.4, but not that many. Geographically, this is probably the smallest area of the 3, so that's part of the reason why there's fewer sales. I did include Leaside. I probably did, I went all the way to kind of Bathurst where I started, the west side kind of comparison. I went all the way to the DVP where I started the east side comparison, but still just from a geographic standpoint, it doesn't cover as much area. So the number of sales and the number of houses that are in and around there are going to be less. We also have more green space. So there's a lot of area that's taken up by parks and actually a massive cemetery that's in the middle of Midtown. You've also got part of the Don Valley ravine system that's there, just kind of like on the eastern kind of edge of it. We've also got more kind of ravine and green space up just north of Sunnybrook Hospital and that kind of stuff. So that isn't me saying oh, look, there's way more green space. I'm not trying to use that as a positive necessarily, but it just occupies space where maybe there would be houses in the same amount of land coverage in the east or the west. And no, I'm not trying to say that land should be turned into houses either. I just am trying to let you know why there's fewer sales in total. So if we just take a quick look at those 7 places and we look at the stats and counts, you'll see, again, getting to the taxes, $7,000. So there's just another indication that, Midtown, generally speaking, is just more expensive than other areas. Your average of those 7 sales was, 1.44. So almost no matter where you are in the city, if you're looking at 1.4 to 1.5 range, you're looking at a 3-bed, 2-bath. And the question is it a semi? Could you get it detached in what kind of shape and etc.? Of those 7, 4 of them are semis, and not a lot of, really, if any, kind of half stories and that kind of stuff. All 7 of those sales were 2 stories. What do they have? What do they come with? So let's take a look at parking. Of the 7, 6 of 7. That's interesting. Somebody said they had 5 or more spaces. That's not common. 6 of the 7 come with parking. Great. And if we look at garages, 3 of the 7, so almost 50%. But again, garages are just tough to come by. Not nearly as many laneways in Midtown as there are in even East York, or certain parts of East York, I should say. But garages certainly can exist even at the back of a mutual driveway, which is not necessarily uncommon. Mutual driveway would be a driveway that exists kind of between 2 houses on either side. And so what do they look like in that range? So if we take a look at, this home, I'll point out right here, it says 369 Mount Pleasant Road. Mount Pleasant Road is a very busy road. So what I expect is that this home will have very nice finishes, but still sells for a decent price because it's on, arguably one of the busiest streets in the entire city, but comes with a garage, which is fantastic. And you can see nicely renovated kitchen, flooring looks a little bit newer. This one was nicely staged. You'll also see radiant heating and that kind of stuff. So it doesn't automatically mean that, that all the mechanics and stuff like that are kind of modern central air furnaces, etc. You still can find older mechanics in this price range, but this home has been prettied up a little bit, which is nice to see. But again, sells at a decent price because of, where it's at on a main street. And then if you look on kind of a little bit of a quieter side street and in the detached range, this one comes with no parking and it's only a 2-bedroom. So 2-bed, 1-bath, but very nice curb appeal. They've obviously done some work with the eaves troughs and the windows and the front door to kind of make it all match and coordinate. And then the interior features probably going to need some updating. Yeah, so when you look at the kitchen, you can see this is from, I'm not even sure what year, but certainly predates the 80s. Absolutely. This could be 50s, 60s. Not the home being built in this time, just that's when this kitchen or those cabinets might be from. Even detached homes, you can find them, but they're going to need some love, right? They're going to need some cosmetic work. They're probably going to need some systems and mechanics updates as well. But it's not impossible to find a detached home in Midtown in that price range, but you probably need a reno budget as well. Okay, so last stop on our journey is going to be downtown. If you look here on the screen, you'll see the Annex and Yorkville. I don't know that anybody really considers that part of downtown, but I just included that section just because it's kind of the gap between the west side and the east side and the Midtown kind of, areas that I already drew, and I included them. And for why not? Because you'll see for freehold properties between 1.4 and 1.5 million for those 2 months, you'll see that there were only 4 sales. So they exist, but not that many. Now, if I take the price constraints off, and then if I go to unlimited, so 63 sales of freehold properties for April or May in that section. So again, they happen and they are there at kind of any price point, but it's the lowest amount of freehold transactions and stuff like that happen out of those 4 major areas that I've covered so far. The next lowest was Midtown at 147, which is more than double this. And this is a slightly larger kind of geographic area of coverage than Midtown, which was the smallest one out of all of them. So the reason being is that the vast majority of this area has been developed into condo properties of some type. So I'll show you that if I switch from freehold to condo, you can see that there are 669 sales, but you'll see one of them was a locker. So we'll ignore that one. 668 sales between those 2 months were condo type properties. If I put the price constraints back on and say, okay, well, how many of those condo sales are between 1.4 and 1.5 million, then you can see there's only 11. So 11 of those 668. So the vast majority of the condo sales that happen in that area are typically under 1.4 million. Now, what I'm going to do is, because there's so few properties in that price range, we're going to look at freehold and condo. So if you need to be kind of downtown or very, very central like that and are pre-approved for or willing to spend somewhere between 1.4 and 1.5. I'll just give you a rundown of what the different kinds of properties are and what you get and what you don't get. Of the 15, we've got an average sale price of 1.437, property taxes of around 7,000. Again, if we were looking at freehold only, it probably would be like a little over $7,000 per year. So probably more like $7,200, $7,300 a year. And 3-bed, 3-bath is the average. So you get an extra bathroom if you're going to be fairly central living in that area, but you're going to get like less space and no backyard and that kind of stuff, which we'll talk about in a second. Of those 15 properties, if we go down to the type, you'll see that 8 of the 15 are condo apartments, 2 are condo townhouses, only 1 semi-detached, and then 3 row houses or freehold townhouses. And 9 of the 15 were all considered apartments in terms of the style, right? So now, interestingly enough, 4 of them were 3 stories. So what that means is you're going to have some newer townhouse developments, whether they're freehold or condo townhouses in that area, and newer development townhomes. So I'd say built within the last, I don't know, let's call it 15 years or so, are typically 3 stories. So they don't always do a basement, I think maybe because it's more expensive to do a basement than it would be to kind of top up a third level. And so newer development townhouses, you're going to get 3 stories. Does mean that there's a lot of stairs, but so be it. Do they have parking? Do they not have parking? Whatever. So let's take a look. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parking of the 15 places. 14 out of 15 come with parking, which is great. So not hard to get parking in that price range downtown. Garages, 12. Now, what I will say is that probably does not get you your own garage necessarily, although it could. Certainly for those new condo townhouses, you might get like either a garage that's kind of built underneath, but still at ground level, so underneath the rest of the property. But what it probably means is that there is an underground garage as part of like the condo apartment. So an underground basement garage for the entire building. You don't necessarily get your own garage, but you get a parking space in a much larger garage in a communal fashion with everybody else in the building. Just from the look of them, they're townhouse-like or high-rise, because they are predominantly condo apartments, but at a very healthy price point. Especially down by the water, you can get some places that have some really lovely views of the lake. So just using this one as an example at 88 Harbor, which is right at like Bay and Queens Quay kind of thing. So you can see from the kind of living room area that it's a corner unit, and you'd be able to kind of look out south and probably east or west onto the lake, showing you some pictures of the views. I mean, they're outstanding, right? So looking south across the Toronto Islands, just some really gorgeous views and a big wraparound balcony. So this is the kind of thing that you can get for that kind of price in that location. But if we look at, let's say something that's more in like Yorkville, I mean, this is at 1 Bloor, and that's on the 51st floor. So you're going to get some pretty cool views from that as well. So this is a much newer condo. And, interior finishes are going to be great, very modern. And this will have some great views as well, but they'll be more like cityscape type views. And just to take a quick look at maybe something more like a townhouse. So here's one on Brunel Court, which is down in like the City Place area, sort of close to Skydome, Rogers Center. And this will be like a 3-story type modern townhouse where you'd walk into the main level and you've got your kitchen and your living room. Nice modern new finishes, new builds, very lovely. Little bit of outdoor space, like a terrace kind of thing, but not really like, a backyard necessarily or anything like that. I guess something small, with a bit of turf, and, they've got a basketball net and that kind of stuff. So it's a backyard-like, there's a barbecue. So it gives you a little bit of that very urban kind of like backyard feeling. But those are the different kinds of properties that you get in this section of the city for 1.4 to 1.5 million. So to wrap things up, here are the 4 major areas that we kind of went over, and I wanted to show them all on one screen. So you can see that, like, generally speaking, they're all fairly equivalent in size-ish, but by far and away, the vast majority of transactions that happen are going to be in East York, just in total, because again, it's very residential, then the West, then Midtown, and then that kind of Midtown area. Now, you might be looking at this map and saying, wait a second, looks like that there's a bit of a corner or a couple of corners missing, but certainly a major one right here, which was considered the old city of York. The reason I did not include this is because there is very, very few properties that sell between 1.4 and 1.5 million in that pocket. And so I'm going to reserve that area for a whole other video where I'm going to cover a different price point altogether. And then the other thing that I would say is that you might be looking at this and saying, wow, it looks like there's still quite a bit of space around those areas. That covers a fair bit of ground, but before you get to a neighboring city like Mississauga, for example, which is a completely different city, we still have all of Etobicoke, which is here, and all of North York, which is up here, and all of Scarborough, which is over here. That's going to be its own video as well. Because really, people who live in Scarborough or live in Etobicoke or live in North York, they very rarely refer to individual neighborhoods and just say, oh, I live in Etobicoke. And Etobicoke honestly refers to like this entire, like from the lake all the way to like the 401. And Scarborough refers to from the lake all the way north of the 401, just as an example, but east of the 404. So anyway, that's going to be a whole other kind of separate video, and we'll talk about that. So we will cover all those areas, so don't fret. We're going to do other price points as well. But if you found this video helpful, please give it a like. If you subscribe to the channel, you make sure that you won't miss any upcoming content. I'm Jamie Harnish. I'm with Bosley Real Estate, and I hope to see you on the next one.